You are listening to the serialized audiobook podcast for Blood of the Stars, an epic fantasy novel written by Karyne Norton, read by Paeter Frandsen and Karyne Norton. If you can't wait to listen to the whole audiobook, or if you want a signed physical copy, go to karynnorton.com/shop to get the lowest cost by buying direct. You can also find the audiobook on Audible, Barnes & Noble, and other standard retailers. Please enjoy the next installment of Blood of the Stars by Karyne Norton. Chapter 18. Durrican snorted as if entertained by Aeliana's attempt at heroism, then turned in a circle like he might settle down for a nap. Arvid and Vera screamed their protests, and a sparking cough left the dragon's snout. Durrican's amusement only served to make Aeliana wary, but she was too close to turn back. He stilled enough for Arvid and Vera to get situated, which also allowed Aeliana to get closer. Horns jutted out from Durrican's neck, possibly natural, but more likely some sort of collar. The horns gave her guardians something to hold on to, and gaps in the dragon's scales provided footholds. Footholds that were close enough to his underbelly that Aeliana felt certain she could reach them. If she could live that long. As she sidestepped Durrican's tail, he stood, stomping in a circle to test the security of his cargo. His tail bent and curved, the scales nearly brushing Aeliana aside, which probably would have been her death. From the top down, the scales appeared shiny and slippery, but Aeliana got the sense that if she could run her hands from the bottom up, their delicate edges would be as sharp as knives. Vera screamed her irritation, scrambling to regain purchase when her hand slipped. Heart thudding in her chest, Aeliana used that moment to leap up and snag Vera's boot, pulling the woman down to the ground with her. Vera screamed again, this time in pain, as something snapped with her landing. Aeliana grimaced at the sound as she rolled to the side. She had no time to be shocked or even proud of her success. Strange metal spikes grew from the ground, wrapping around Durrican's paws like some sort of trap, nearly catching Aeliana along with him. The beast growled and lifted his feet, forcing the metal to bend. Aeliana rolled even farther from Vera to avoid getting trampled, then glanced back at the others. Silmar's hands rested on two large rocks, his face a mask of concentration as the metal in the surrounding land bent to his will, sliding to the surface and wrapping around the dragon's paws once more, reinforcing the traps. The others lowered their swords and bows, as Aeliana's proximity to the dragon made it more likely they'd injure her than Durrican in a physical attack. Spirals of smoke shot out from Arvid's hands, snapping the metal chains to free Durrican without difficulty. The beast readjusted, causing Aeliana to bump into his soft underbelly. He grunted and turned as Vera stood, nursing her wrist against her side while looking for another foothold. Aeliana could take the woman down again, but she didn't need Vera. She just needed her cloak. She stepped forward, but Durrican let loose a thundering rumble that shook Aeliana's insides and knocked her to her backside. Vera used the distraction to climb up on his back once more, accepting Arvid's help and wincing as she adjusted her grip to accommodate her wound. Aeliana followed before she could think through the consequences. She jumped on Durrican's tail, the scales as slippery as she'd expected. Reaching for purchase only sliced her hands more as Durakin flared out the edges of the scales to flay her skin. The blood trickling down her hands made it that much harder to think. The temptation to use it in some way almost impossible to resist. But giving in now would mean giving herself over to Arvid and Vera, to the dark spirits, and most likely to Mavis. She took shorter breaths through her mouth, avoiding the coppery scent's pull as long as possible. Durakin circled again, and Eliana nearly lost her grip. She yanked one of his scales off, slicing her palm in the process, releasing even more blood. She climbed higher, managing to reach the edge of Vera's cloak as Durakin picked up his pace, which jostled Eliana to the precarious edge of his back. At any moment, he would take off, and Eliana would either be swept away with the enemy or dead. The fleeting thought that her death might be the safest thing for everyone else crept through her mind, but she shook that darkness away. With a burst of adrenaline, she launched herself at Vera, grabbing the woman's cloak and swinging low to the ground. Eliana's weight pulled the cloak down, nearly ripping Vera from the dragon's back, but Arvid held Vera tight. Instead, Eliana was dragged along the charred earth, flaming skeletons of trees whipping across her face. She reached up with the scale she still gripped and blindly sawed at Vera's cloak until the small tear she formed caught the momentum of her weight, ripping completely and sending Eliana tumbling to the forest floor. Durakin's back legs nearly trampled her, and his tail snapped back, its tip slapping her back and rolling her through embers that singed her along with Vera's cloak. Bright white light flashed, blinding her. Then there was a crack as her head hit rock. The blackness that came over her felt expected. A hit like that should have knocked her out. But her racing mind wasn't right. Neither was the pain. Hot and searing, like something spliced through the center of her head, striving to be released as the pressure built. The pain fell away as quickly as it came, her mind no longer connected to her body. Was this death? Would she join the stars? The blackness shifted to the deep blue of water, but instead of the stars winking before her, Cyrus's lifeless face floated by. She wanted to scream, to reach out for him, but the water shimmered, quickly replaced by the image of the dead girl outside Galdrick's stargazer. Her accusing eyes trained on Eliana even as Arvid's magic buried her body. The foliage shifted into the dragon's sneer, its neck red and raw, stripped of scales, but also the collar. A creature with glassy eyes and red wings fluttered past, replacing the dragon. Eliana fought the images, trying to pull herself from the strange dream, but instead saw herself behind prison bars, eyes full of contempt, face half hidden by stringy hair. It morphed into a far more pleasant face, full of freckles, splitting for a grin. A moment when Cyrus laughed so hard, tears streamed down his face. Then a man, his face in shadow as he bent to kiss her. A silver creature writhing on the ground. A muscular woman rising from the water. Crows pecking at her eyes. A battle, too full of blood and smoke to make out individuals. A heavy-set man handing her a sword. A city stretched before her. A young man lying on a table, chest open with heart and ribs exposed. An arrow protruding from her own chest. The visions came and went until Eliana no longer tried to make sense of them. When the last image faded, a silver heart embedded in a pale woman's forehead, the blackness took her once more. She woke to the pain spreading as she regained awareness of every cut and burn on her body. With the pain came the reminder of her purpose. It felt like she'd been out for ages, living entire lifetimes through the visions she'd seen. Visions that were already beginning to fade in her memory. But the dragon still ran across the clearing, as if no time had passed. Despite the dried-up plants around her, Eliana lay in a thick bed of daisies. She bolted up, fighting through the throbbing ache to slide her hands over the singed fabric of the cloak, aware of Velden, Silmar, and Cyrus all yelling and running in her direction, while the others chased the dragon, wasting arrows on its armored hide. "Where is it?" she mumbled over and over, more desperately as her hands came up empty. Could the vial of blood have been in Vera's dress pocket? Or a pocket higher up by her shoulders? She'd cut off as much of the cloak as she could, but it hadn't been enough. She felt like weeping. The blood wasn't there. She turned to find Cyrus's shocked eyes on her. "Are you all right? What were you thinking?" He patted her down, making her aware of tinier cuts and scraped skin, like she'd rolled through broken glass. It was worth it to see his body relax in relief as he found her whole. To see him care. "Vera still has the blood," Velden said, eyes closed and hands fisted around the remnants of her cloak. In the distance, the dragon's wings expanded so he could leap into the air. "He's too heavy for me to bring down," Silmar said, "and too far." Each flap brought a rush of wind that nearly knocked Eliana over, and then the backdraft seemed to suck the fire even closer. They spoke as if they still had a chance, but Eliana knew it was too late. Vera still had her blood, and the dragon was flying away. "Then just bring her down," Velden commanded, his former jesting tone a distant memory. He passed the cloak to Silmar. "Quick!" Silmar gripped the fabric, then pulled his arms back as if yanking something over his shoulder. In the distance, Eliana heard a scream. She sat up, eyes on the dragon shrinking in the sky, where a body tumbled from his back. It was both an eternity and a blink in time as she watched Vera's fall. Her mouth went dry at its abrupt stop on the distant forest floor. Silmar's face relaxed in grim triumph as Durakin and Arvid flew farther into the distance without their prize. He dropped Vera's cloak as Jasperus and Kendallin raced through the smoldering forest in Vera's direction, maybe to check for the vial, maybe to check if Vera was dead. Eliana shuddered. Velden reached for a large man's boot caught in a blackened bush. The brown leather was familiar to Eliana from years of scrubbing it clean for Arvid. She could imagine his anger over its loss. How much more would he hate her for Vera's death? Would he turn around for revenge? To get her blood? "The zealots tricked us," Velden groaned, slamming the boot against the dirt. "What?" Silmar's scars puckered once more as he leaned heavily on his molten staff. "Vera gave the vial to Arvid." Velden turned a pained expression on Eliana. "Arvid has your blood." Chapter 19. Everyone's gaze shifted to the dragon, now a mere dot in the sky, where the pale moonlight glanced off scales. Eliana reached for the half-cloak, patting it down once more, begging it to hold the missing vial. Instead, she found a tiny golden star. It was heavy, more like a ball of lead with spikes, some trinket Vera had probably stolen. She chucked it at the ground, drawing the others' attention. Silmar's eyes widened, and he limped her way. So, Veldon's eyebrows lifted, and he bent down to pick up the star. You earned your starlock. I suspected as much with that flash of light. Cyrus gasped, leaning in to see it. The others around them smiled. Holm even clapped. Eliana shrank away. That can't be right. Yes, it can. Silmar eyed the starlock. That act of bravery could have easily initiated your awakening. Now your blood will answer to your starlock. They'll work in tandem to make your magic even stronger. Eliana shivered. Silmar's gaze traveled over Eliana, most likely taking in cuts, bruises, and singed hair. Then he studied the strange bed of daisies surrounding her. Had she done that while she was unconscious? Had her starlock? For the first time, Silmar's lips lifted. Eliana thought it might be a smile, but the way his scars shifted with his beard left her anxious. Tonight wasn't a loss. It was a sacrifice, he said. And with sacrifice comes gain. She glanced back toward the others, silently counting them off. Holm's arm wrapped around Iris, and Cyrus, Lukai, and Veldon all studied the starlock. With Jasperus and Kendallin checking on Vera's body, they were all accounted for. At least her blood had been the only sacrifice that night. Veldon held out the star. Congratulations! Eliana backed away. I don't want it. Silmar's back straightened, his face darkening as the knot of scars once again bunched together. You don't get a choice. It's the sun who chooses the half-light, not the other way around. He turned, stalking off toward the others to bark out orders, once again leaning heavily on his staff. I think you offended him, Cyrus said. Everyone's mere existence offends him. Veldon stepped forward, turning Eliana's hand palm up. He dropped the thimble-sized star in her hand and closed her fist around it. It felt heavy and warm, like the golden arrow had. Alive. It's an honor to be chosen. His smile softened the rebuke. Whether you use it or not is up to you, but it's still a gift from the sun that you should accept. She glanced at Veldon's neck, void of a starlock even though she'd seen Veldon do magic. He joined Silmar before Eliana could work out the inconsistency. Eliana held back, knowing that if she continued on with these people, she was making a choice to join their war and learn their magic. The object that had previously felt harmless now seemed sinister, a snare lying in wait to trick her into using it. They made it sound like she'd done something to earn the thing, like they expected her to use magic almost out of reverence for the sun. She didn't even know what to think of the sun. She wasn't sure what the Vendarans believed about it, or how that lined up with the stars she'd worshipped all her life. She squeezed the object, letting it dig painfully into her palm as a reminder of its danger. Cyrus stepped away, his actions momentarily seeming like a rejection. but he spoke with Lukai, gesturing back at Eliana. Lukai nodded, then handed over his own bow with the white wood Eliana had admired, along with a leather quiver and several arrows. Cyrus returned, holding out the bow. Eliana hesitantly grasped its wood, but Cyrus didn't let go. "Is this bow evil?" The soft question ushered in the memory of their archery lessons. Eliana pressed her lips together, still not ready to face the deeper truths of his analogy. "The magic in your blood is no more evil than this bow," Cyrus said. "Your guardians used it for evil, but you can use it for good. The motivation behind it can change the outcome." He released the bow. Eliana hugged the weapon close, unable to hold his gaze. The wind picked up, bringing heat and the threat of flames with it. The events of the night passed over Eliana in a wave, weighing her down with exhaustion. Clouds covered the moonlight, bringing the fresh clearing into deeper shade, the glow of the dying fire at their backs, their only light. When Jasperus and Kendallin returned, the slight shake of their heads seemed to propel the others into action. Lukai checked everyone's injuries while Kendallin and Jasperus gathered fallen arrows. Silmar and Veldin held back, watching Eliana and Cyrus. "Look," Cyrus whispered, his eyes following Silmar and Veldin's approach. "Gamza's dying wish was that I protect you." He looked away, his jaw tight. "The truth is, you probably don't need my protection. You've got all these progenies and your magic, but maybe I'm not meant to protect you from external threats. Maybe she wanted me to protect you from yourself and your own doubts. You don't believe your magic can be good? Prove it. Let Silmar train you. Let him teach you how to control it." Her heart pounded with his words. "I need to learn how to get rid of it." "It sounds like the same thing to me. If it's as bad as you say, they'll be eager to teach you how to get rid of it. Besides, it's no longer just about your magic. These people can help you find your mother." Her gut clenched as Cyrus hit on the one thing Eliana couldn't refuse: the chance to find her family. "Plus," he added, "if they're trying to get back your blood, they can probably help us get the golden arrow that started all this. I could go home." She blinked back tears. "I'm so sorry, Cyrus. I've taken so much from you." His fist tightened around the hilt of his sword, which looked odd against the singed priestly robes he'd refused to exchange for the Vendarin leathers. "The stars saw fit for me to do without. Gams wouldn't want me to waste these opportunities blaming someone else, especially when that someone is just as much a victim." "You're a good friend, Cyrus." Eliana swiped at the wetness in her eyes. "I don't think I've had one before now." His smile bloomed, and he elbowed her in the side. "Gamp said we would be the best of friends. I can't make a liar out of him." Despite everything, she returned his smile. She even wanted his words to be true. She'd wanted freedom from her magic. She still did. But she couldn't expect to be free from something she didn't understand. Finding her mother and a way home for Cyrus had to be her new priorities, even if it meant learning magic. As Silmar and Veldin approached, one more objection rose to the surface, a dark thing that tainted any acquiescence she might have leaned toward. "Is it safe for me to stay with the group?" she asked the progenies. "If Mavis uses my blood to brand me, is there risk of me turning on you at any point?" The question felt ridiculous, The idea of her being used as a weapon against these people almost arrogant. But it had to be asked. Of course there's risk. Silmar's straightforward answer made Eliana's stomach drop. But that could happen even if you strike out on your own. At least if you're with us, we'll have the hope of restraining you, or even cutting out the brand mark on your skin to reverse it. The safest place for you to be is with us. Eliana chewed on her lower lip, still not convinced. The brand can be reversed that easily? Cyrus let out a long breath, his body slouching. Veldin winced. Reversed, yes. Easily? No. Everything inside Eliana will fight us, including her blood and that starlock she just earned. He tapped her fist, reminding her it was clenched so tight her palm had grown numb. She relaxed her fingers, then tucked the charm in her pocket and rubbed the feeling back into her hand. When she scratched at the mark on her palm, she couldn't help glancing at Lukai. His left arm was wrapped in seaweed, and he limped as he approached Kendallin. Eliana was starting to feel a pull, a heightened awareness. Not exactly the attraction Veldin had suggested, but a desire to help and a need to prioritize him. Was that what Mavis's brand would feel like? Probably a lot worse. When can she use my blood? Eliana asked. Silmar's brow furrowed. Once she has it in her possession, she could use it at any moment. But my guess is that she'll wait for summer solstice. It's what she's done in the past, because with the longest hours in the sun's light, the brand will be the strongest. Many bonding ceremonies are held then for the same reason, Veldin said. Plus, they're not aware Eliana's already had her awakening, Silmar said. They'll want to give her time to earn her starlock to make sure her magic is worth stealing. Eliana bit her lip, watching the others disappear from view as Jasperus led them around the dwindling flames toward another rocky path. It would take them back to their cave and away from the smoke and stench of dragon. And based on Iris's earlier directions, it would also take them toward the other recreants in Valorian, toward unknown danger and threats. Only Iris and Lukai remained at the path's edge, a faithful servant and bondmate, as if their roles held them there, unable to move on without her. It made her want to be worthy of their devotion. You know we're the good guys, right? Veldin cocked his head, then sprayed her face lightly with water from his hands. She wiped her face. You just killed a woman. I don't know what to think of you. He glanced across the clearing, as if Vera's body might be just beyond their view. Fair point. Does it help if I remind you we're in a war? She was the enemy, whereas you, he gestured toward her and Cyrus, are not. I could become the enemy, with or without Mavis's brand. There's something wrong with my magic. Eliana glanced at Silmar, who didn't disagree. Was she the only one who felt the pull of darkness? It was less about whether she trusted these people, and more about whether she could trust herself. Then let us help you, Silmar said, both hands balanced on his staff. You let me teach you about your magic, wean you from the blood magic, and then, if you still want me to get rid of your magic, I'll teach you that too. Silmar, Veldin started to protest. Do we have a deal? Silmar held out his gnarled hand, the thick scars drawing Eliana's curiosity once more. She glanced at Veldin, who glared at Silmar, but said nothing. What's in it for you? She asked. Why did you bother waiting for me in the first place? It can't just be a favor for a priestess everyone loved. Silmar's hand hung in the air, but his confidence didn't wane. Just like your mother is the key to defeating Mavis, you are the key to rescuing your mother. The way Mavis uses her brands, well, it leaves them imprisoned in their mind almost as much as their body. After all this time, if you aren't with us when we find Emerus, if you aren't safe, I'm not sure she'll ever escape that prison. Eliana stared at Silmar's outstretched hand for a moment longer. Deal. She grasped his forearm, surprised by his strong grip as he returned the gesture. Without further deliberation, he turned, passing Iris and Lukai, clearly expecting them all to follow. Lukai stepped forward, rubbing the back of his neck as though flustered. I'm sorry I couldn't come fast enough. I sensed your pain. I wanted to be there, but my injuries needed tending. Plus the injuries of the others around me. He closed his eyes. I should have come to you first. She placed her hand on his arm. No, never abandon someone else in need to save me, regardless of our bond. His brow furrowed, but instead of commenting, he turned her hand over, gently running his fingers over her forearms and palms. The motion felt surprisingly intimate until she sensed a coolness over her burns and her pain receded to something far more tolerable. Her heart raced, but she couldn't tell which made her more anxious, his magic or his touch. He repeated the motion over her face and neck, but this time her cheeks were too warm for the coolness to ever come. Ready? He reached for the bow and quiver, but instead of taking them back, he helped her strap them on like she was a child. They suit you better anyway. The gift was extravagant, and she should thank him, but she was still too flustered by his touch. She adjusted her hair where it got caught under the straps, wincing as he tightened them on her back where Arvid had carved his message. Oh, love. Iris shook her head, mistaking the reason for Eliana's pained expression. You should have let me cut your hair. Chapter 20. The boat rocked, the light sway more natural to Aura than the heaviness of walking on land. A salty breeze left strands of short dark hair, blocking her view, but it was too soon to see Bamboo Island against the rising sun anyway. She closed her eyes to assess its place in the world by feel instead of sight. The sliver of magic needed was an extravagance when it had once been like breathing. Her body was still weak from her efforts to trace the arrow across the barrier. She couldn't regret singing the priestess to sleep, but she still paid for that choice. It could take weeks to get her energy stores back to the level they'd been, if they could even be replenished. Every year she faded a little more. Out of habit, Aura ran her fingers over the braid at her wrist. The smooth hairs, a reassurance, even though they represented her greatest loss. She still remembered how it had thrummed, even though the sensation had died down to a slight tingle against her skin. She'd only felt that thrum a handful of times in her life. Each time, it had led her to a new piece she'd lost. And each time, she'd lost it again. Now that the golden arrow had been used, it could be hundreds of miles away, or it could still be on the tiny island that grew closer as the sun rose higher. Its power was too dim to sense. She'd have to use the girl. She was grateful she could use her. She'd sensed her connection to the girl's blood, but she couldn't let that truth matter. The golden arrow mattered more. The arrow would always matter more. I hope you enjoyed listening to the latest installment of Blood of the Stars by Karyne Norton. If you enjoy listening to this narration, you might enjoy listening to the Finding Fantasy Reads podcast, where Paeter and I narrate fantasy short stories from a variety of authors to help you find your next favorite author. Check it out at findingfantasyreads.com. Thanks so much for listening.